This will be the first part of a two-part lecture on religion and religious extremism. Today we're going to take a look at some of the ongoing implications of how we got to where we are. And as we've been taking a look the last several weeks, we've been taking a look at what are going to be the major problems within art and propaganda. As we look 20, 30 years beyond, what are you going to be dealing with looking to the future? And we started with taking a look at racism and how racism is going to be an ongoing problem that we need to continue to address, and because its residual elements continue to remain. The issues of gender and equality are going to be another ongoing issue up for debate, and understanding identity and how we are to perceive gender within the world. And I think that's going to be something that's going to continue on for the next several decades. And another issue that we're going to be combating as we look for the next 20 or 30 years is going to be religion and religious extremism, and some of the problems that will arise as a result of this. And it's almost as though the world has gotten a little bit more away from this idea of nationalism and seeing some of the problems, learned some of the lessons of nationalism, looking back to the lessons we learned from World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. Perhaps we've kind of grown up a little bit, so to speak, although there are some lasting complexities and lasting problems that still remain in our relationships with foreign entities. But it seems like for the most part, a lot of the conflicts that we're going to have for the next foreseeable little while is going to be centered on religious extremism. And we have this interesting idea today as we take a look at religion. There's this duality that, and we'll talk about this as we get into the lecture. There's this tendency to either be kind of not religious at all, kind of atheistic, or probably more along the lines of agnostic. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have this idea of extremism. And so again, we have this polarization between people who don't really identify as religious, or at least, they might suggest that they're spiritual, but they're certainly not. They're less and less associated with organized religion. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have this extreme devout religion, and these two dynamics are going to butt heads. And as we move towards the end of the semester, I wanted to take a look at this particular shot here, as we just recently went past the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landings. I think this really does help to put a lot of the ideas that we talked about in this class in terms of nationalism, race, gender, and religion. It puts it all into a little bit more perspective. This is a shot taken by the astronaut William Anders as they were tasked to go and orbit the moon, and this is the first time a human being ever left the Earth's orbit and orbited another celestial body with the moon. And the main focus, the main purpose of the mission was twofold. One of them was to orbit the moon in order to see if that's possible, because that's going to be a big part of the Apollo moon landing, is to enter into the moon's orbit. So that they can then take the moon lander and then land on the moon. And the second part was to take photographs of the dark side of the moon, which no human being has ever seen. And so some of the most important photos, scientific photos, emerged at this time, seeing the dark side of the moon. And as Anders was taking photographs of the dark side of the moon, he noticed this wet, spinning blue marble off into the void. And he couldn't help but to take a picture. And so this one is entitled Earthrise. But what I want to argue to you today is that this photograph here changed, albeit for a moment, the way that we see each other. Never before were we able to see ourselves in this manner, right? Every time people study maps and geography in school, or they take a look at maps as they're traveling, we always see lines on the sheet of paper, and we see these borders. But as we see this against the infinite backdrop of space, we don't see Earth with borders. And we start to realize that these boundaries that we create are all human-made. They're not natural. They're not, innately there. They're all arbitrary, and they're all human constructs. And so, for the first time, in some ways, we felt distant and we felt alone. As we take a look at this bright spinning planet, you can see that there's nothing else that surrounds it. And so in some ways, we felt empty and alone and void in the infinite backdrop of nothingness. And we kind of realized, we knew this, but this was a visual representation of how alone we really are, how distant everything else is from us. But at the same time, that makes us that live here even more important, even more connected, even more related. And so this idea that there are no Americans or Russians, or there's no Jewish or Muslims, there's no black or white, that there's just simply humanity. There's the human race, and that's what really starts to change. And so for a moment, all the wars and contentions, the petty bickering that we have, all seemed arbitrary. For a moment, we were all one and able to participate, even though it was the United States that was funding this and going to the moon. It felt like it was a human accomplishment, that we were all able to participate in this great human achievement. And so that lasted, for about 5 or 10 minutes or so, and then we all went back to fighting. But that's the main idea. And the writer Archibald MacLeish captures this idea with this following quote that I wanted to read with you, and it does really help to encapsulate some of the overarching ideas that we've been talking about in this class of how we generally tend to create social constructs in order to separate ourselves, in order to feel superior. But for a moment here, we all felt united, and he says, man's conception of themselves and of each other has always depended on their notion of the earth. When the earth was the world, all the world there was, they saw themselves as a creature of the center of the universe, the sole particular concern of God. And from that high place, they ruled and killed and conquered as they pleased. And when centuries later the earth was no longer the world, but a small wet spinning planet in the solar system of a minor star off the edge of the inconsolable galaxy in the immeasurable distance of space, men began to see themselves not as God-directed actors at the center of a noble drama, but as helpless victims of a senseless farce, where all the rest were helpless victims also, and millions could be killed in the worldwide wars or blasted cities in the concentration camps without a thought or reason. And so that really does help to understand some of the main aspects that we've been studying this semester as we take a look at the understanding of humanity and why art has changed, why it became more brutal and ugly, and some of the ideas of the world wars, right? If there is no overarching meaning to this, then it doesn't really matter that we can put people in concentration camps because people are just flesh and blood rather than, God-centered beings of creation. But then again, that idea of humanity changes, and he captures that with this quote here. He says, now in the last few hours, the notion may have changed again. For the first time in all of time, men have seen it not as continents or oceans from the little distance of 100 miles or 2 or 3, but seen it from the depth of space. Seen it whole and round and beautiful, and seeing it so, one question came to the minds of those who looked at it: is it inhabited? This idea of, could there be life here when there is such harsh conditions that surround us? The medieval notion of Earth put man at the center of everything. The nuclear notion of Earth put him nowhere, beyond the range of reason, lost in absurdity and war. The latest notion may have other consequences. To see the Earth as it truly is, small and blue and beautiful in that eternal silence where it floats, is to see ourselves as riders on the earth together, brothers on that bright loveliness in the eternal cold, brothers who know now they are truly brothers. And I like this quote because it does dig and remove the very aspect of what propaganda does. This idea of separating us, the idea of trying to get us to see ourselves through the eyes of human beings rather than to see the ideas of truth. And I think for a moment here, this photograph by Anders really helps us to understand truth of who we truly are. But as we take a look at today, these ideas have changed once again. We become more isolated. We see ourselves as more separate, particularly as we think about the COVID-19 and being self-quarantined. We are even more isolated today, but that's not necessarily a new concept. That's been happening since the 1950s or so, where we become more and more isolated and alienated from one another. I want to take a look at another 21st century philosopher, also known as a comedian, Sebastian Maniscalco, and take a look at how he captures the essence of who we are today. And I want you to think of, is he right about some of the ideas that he presents?
I was sitting in my house a couple weeks ago, just relaxing. My doorbell rang. This is weird. It's a different feeling when your doorbell rings today opposed to 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, your doorbell rang. That was a happy moment in your house. It's called company. You'd be sitting there on a Thursday night watching TV. Your doorbell rang. The whole family shot off the couch. Put the lights on. Somebody's here. We got people. The whole family went to the door. The kids were in socks. They slid up to the door. Nobody looked to see who it was. Right? You just opened up the door. You were like, oh my, look at that. Look at us here. And you'd ask them, what the hell are you doing here? And the person would be like, I was in the neighborhood. I thought I might stop by, see how the kids are doing. They're like, oh, come on in. We're going to have some cake. Your mother had a little Entenmann's. Maybe some Sara Lee crumble cake. Just in case company came over. She made an announcement when she bought it. She's like, listen, nobody touch this cake. This is for company only. Those crap muffins, those are for you people. You better hope somebody comes over so we can cut the cake. She put her cake in the middle of the table, proud of it. Right? She put it right in the middle. Cut yourself a slice. Want a cup of coffee? We're going to do want some Sanka? Yeah, that's old school. A lot of the young kids are looking at me like, what is that, an iPhone app? What the hell is Sanka? Your mother had a tin, a brown and orange tin of Sanka, ready to go just in case the company. She put a big pot on the table. Go ahead. Nobody had a cell phone back then. If your house phone did ring, your father stood up and said, nobody get that phone. We got company. And you lost track of time. 2 hours went by. You were like, we got to get out of here. That's okay. Next time we're going to come by you. Be like, yeah, my door's always open. Now your doorbell rings? Your own mother's crawling across the kitchen floor. Get down the army crawl. Army crawl, get in the closet. Go get the sword in the living room. Somebody get the sword underneath the couch in the living room. There's a sword.
So he does a good job of making fun of this idea of separateness that we feel today and comparing that to the collective unity that we perhaps once felt as a community before. And so the question is what's happened today that's caused us to feel so distant, so separated, and so empty, right? And part of that is the ongoing virus that's out there, and the self quarantine that we're all kind of enduring now. In fact, as I kind of go out for a little bit of fresh air, and I walk past someone on the streets trying to keep the safe social distance, there's almost this feeling of you can't even make eye contact anymore. So it's almost as though the virus is transmitted through eye contact rather than through breathing and other means. But even before that, we have this idea of feeling of distance and separation, where even going to another person's place seems like an invasion of their privacy, or someone coming to yours is an invasion of yours. And so I wanted to take a look at that idea and juxtapose it with that momentary feeling that we felt in the past, right? As we take a look at the Apollo 8 moon landing, or sorry, the Apollo 8 mission going to the moon's orbit, how we did feel that kind of connectivity, and even after that, right? We kind of felt harmonious and together, and even though there are problems of nationalism that we've had in the past, that did produce a feeling of unity. And even though we've had problems with religion in the past, and some of the problems that religion has led to, a lot of death, a lot of wars, that has the ability to bring people together. And now we feel like that's, as that's deteriorating, now we feel alienated and estranged. And the question is there a way to kind of to put that sense of community back together without having the negative components that we've had in the past? And so what I'd like you to do, and I would have you do this in class, is kind of write down this idea, and I would just have you pause the video here and talk about this. But I want you to define the difference between a religion and a cult, right? What's the difference, right? So we think about this idea. I'm getting you to think about, the idea of extremism. When does something become too much, right? And what might be too much for one might be not enough for another. I don't know how that will play out in your minds, but I want you to determine how these two concepts are different. All right, there's a lot of similarities there, and where you would draw the line between them, right? So what is the difference between a religion and a cult? So pause the video and kind of jot down your own ideas. And the main reason I'm having you jot down your own ideas is as an exercise in your thinking and your process, so you can bring those ideas now back to the lecture, and then think about what you agree with and what you don't as you go through learning. So as we take a look at this, I want you to think about these following elements, and I want you to think about these following movements, groups, or entities, and think about how they function, right? Think about the definition that you gave to a religion and what the definition that you gave to a cult. And again, if we were face-to-face, we would have talked about these in more detail. But I want you to think about these following elements and think about if they function more as a religion or as a cult. Right, and so as you think about the differences between them, what is the main functionality of them? Right, so think about the KKK. Does that function more as a religion, or does it function more as a cult? Black Lives Matter. Does that function more as a religion or as a cult? Feminism. We've talked about that before. Is that more of a religion or is it more of a cult? North Korea, from what you understand about North Korea, does that function more as a religion, or does it function more as a cult? Vegans, are vegans more of a religion or more of a cult? Fox News or MSNBC News or CNN News, whatever your political persuasion, do the media outlets function more as religions or cults? The NFL or NCAA or NBA or NHL, whatever the case may be, do these sports function more as a religion or a cult? And then why? Disney, does Disney function more as a religion or a cult? And then finally, Harry Potter, right? There's a lot of fanatics out there. Are those fanatics part of a religion, or do they function more as part of a cult? And then the main thing I would have us talk about if we're meeting face to face is the difference between a religion and a cult a matter of perspective, right? If you're in a cult, you would say that you're in a religion, right? But if you're not, right, and some people outside of religions believe that people in religions are actually in cults. And so then the question is, what makes, right, a person part of religion or part of a cult? Is it a matter of perspective? Is it a matter of personal preference, right? If you think that feminism is a cult, is it because you are in disagreement with it? Or if you think that that vegans are a matter of a cult, is it because you don't agree with them, right? Or is there something more academic, right? Is there something more than a knee-jerk reaction or something, a matter of subjective argument that we can make? Is there something more concrete that we can think about? So as we think about these, right, is this more of a religion and a cult? And both of them, right, but both religions and cults have set kind of attire that they wear, clothing that they wear. They have set functions and set meetings and rituals that they go through. So as we think about those ideas, the set clothing, the set, organization, and the set meetings that and rituals that people have, right? Are these functioning more as religions or cults? And this last one connects to a previous lecture that we examined with the rise of mass consumerism, and is this functioning more as a religion or a cult? And so here's a couple of definitions that I have, whether you agree with them or not. These are just ways that I have framed this, and so this is just for your reference. A religion, I would argue, is a system of beliefs that seeks to find truth by answering questions about humanity's place in the universe, such as, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? These answers give believers greater meaning to life, that's kind of greater purpose. Generally, religions have codes of ethics, rules, guidelines, etc., for believers to follow, and promise for rewards for those who obey these precepts, such as heaven or blessings. Religions often designate sacred places of worship for believers to practice their faith and perform rituals, such as synagogues or churches or temples, and practice their rituals, their patterns of behavior to help them in their religious practice, right? So as we think about that, the places to go, codes of ethics, rules, and guidelines, how do these, right, fit into that kind of definition? And then the other definition I have is a cult, right? A cult is a more extreme system of beliefs that are centered around a particular person, object, idea, with an absolute or even obsessive devotion. Generally, believers see this person, object, or idea as almost supernatural or deified. Believers can be isolated from other people and influences and treat outsiders and external forces with skepticism and or fear. And so we think about, centering around a particular idea or a particular person. Are these more extreme? Are these more, focusing on taking religion to the next level? Or are they centered around, more moderate beliefs? And again, does that differentiation depend upon your own personal bias, right? And that's what I'm getting you to think about here. And as to connect this with our earlier kind of discussion on Sebastian Malcasalco, I think is the name. As we think about this and we start to treat outsiders and external forces with skepticism or fear, as we think about our world today, are we functioning socially more as a cult or as a religion? And something to think about. I want to show you this clip. This clip talks about the loss of religion as we start to move away and what's actually happening here. And this one, this clip is not put out by our church, it's put out by another group of churches that are concerned particularly with the group of millennials and why they're moving away from the church. And so I wanted you to watch this, and then we'll come back and talk about some of its ideas and how it pertains to this idea of loss within the world today.
You might
might have noticed that here in America, there's one group that's not nearly as involved or engaged in the church as other age groups, 18 to 29-year-olds. We call this generation the Mosaics, and for most churches, this is a demographic black hole. Just how big of a black hole? Get this, 59% of Mosaics with a Christian background drop out of church after attending regularly as a teenager. Now, on the surface, this doesn't seem like a new problem. And in some respects, it isn't. People in this age group have left the church in droves for decades, but historically, many come back. If you think that's going to happen with today's generation, think again. Today's young adults are very different from their counterparts of the past. A lot of them are rethinking the major things in life. Stuff like whether or not marriage is still necessary, or if the church really matters. What's strange is, the majority of these dropouts actually still consider themselves Christians. They're big fans of Jesus, just not the church. Every Mosaic has their own unique reason for leaving the church, but ultimately, they all point their fingers at the Christian community, and what they're saying is, you lost me. Now, hold on. You lost me? Isn't that a little harsh? Well, maybe, but what a person really means when they say that to someone is, you're not making sense to me. Research from our team at Barna shows that millions of Mosaics don't feel like they can ask their most pressing life questions in church. So it's no wonder they turn to technology, pop culture, and their peers for answers. With all of the resources on the internet, young people have access to answers to lots of things, important and trivial. And some of the answers seem to make sense. But just because something makes sense, it doesn't mean it's the truth. Naturally, all that conflicting information leads to more questions and more confusion. These wandering souls are viewing the world through a distorted lens. They need the wisdom of the church to help them see things through the lens of faith, but they can't even see that. What we need is real dialogue, and real answers to the questions that all too often just get swept under the rug. It means we stop ignoring the elephant in the room, roll up our sleeves, and seriously address the tough questions about science, sexuality, culture, and lifestyle. Let's be careful not to judge them too quickly, and give our young Christians the tools they need to cope with the modern world. We need to teach them to be discerning in today's culture, to be influential among their peers, as followers of Christ. Today's changing world is a tough place to live faithfully as a Christian at any age. But if we're going to change the world together, we can't afford to let another young person say, "You lost me."
So the question I want you to think about in relationship to that, of this idea of millennials and the younger generation, particularly college-age students, leaving religion, at least organized religion, in large numbers, is whether or not there are any connections between the loss of religion and the loss of community and the loss of connectivity, right? Are we becoming more isolated and estranged from one another? And is that the growing trend? And then the question is, what can we do about it? I do find it kind of interesting as I've watched the news, and the recent news, in the aftermath of all that's happened with COVID-19, that even though that was the general trend, now it's hard to keep these people off the beaches and off, away from one another. It seem to be more drawn to each other now that they're not supposed to be. That's kind of another kind of topic. But the question is, are we becoming less connected in general? And then how does religion factor into this? And why do you think that people are losing their religious affiliations, right? As we think about not just losing religion, but they're just, moving away from organized religion. What is it about organized religion that is causing people, as the video suggests, to lose them, quote unquote? And what do you think can be done about this, right? What should we do as we think about this and framing that? What should we do about this, at church, or what should we do about this within the university or community settings? And do you think that the loss of religion is due to other fanatical movements, and that these fanatical movements are drawing people away from religion, right? These other religious extremist mindsets are causing people to become disinterested or disenchanted with it. Or do you think these fanatical movements are the loss, are causing people to become maybe more religious on the other side? And so, things to think about as we frame this discussion. I had you read "The Blessed House" by Jhumpa Lahiri, and it's kind of an interesting, fun little story about this couple, Sanjeev and Twinkle, who are from India, and they have this apartment, and Twinkle keeps finding all of these little old artifacts, these Catholic artifacts, the crosses and things of that nature, images of Jesus. And then how she handles them versus how Sanjeev handles them. So what I'd like you to do, and what I'd have you do in class, is I would want you to think about the role of religion between Sanjeev and Twinkle, the role of music, the role of gender expectations, the purpose of the house, the reasons that they entertain and love, and to be able to see that juxtaposition between them and how they see the world differently. And then the question is, we think about how they're seeing the world in their own way. What is Lahiri's argument about the blessed house, right? So who are we supposed to identify with, and who are we not supposed to identify with in the terms of the story? A couple other questions that I want you to think about to get from this particular story is why you think Twinkle wants to preserve the treasures, as she calls them, that she finds, right? And I'd have you kind of write that out in class assignment. And what do you think this says about her character, right? Things that she doesn't necessarily believe in religiously, she still finds value in, and that's kind of an interesting thought. Determine why you think Sanjeev wants to get rid of these treasures, right, that his wife finds value in. Why does he want to get rid of them? Why, even if he doesn't necessarily believe in them, he could at least value her excitement about them. Why do you think he doesn't do that? What do you think this says about his character, right? Consider whether they have a dualist, multiplicitous, or relativist mindset, as we kind of go back to an earlier discussion about those three mindsets early in the semester. Well, how do they see the world, right? Are they dualist? Are they multiplicitous? Or are they relativist in their perspective? And then one of the major themes of the Blessed House pertains to the newness versus tradition. Describe how we see this in the lives of Twinkle and determine, Sanjeev and Twinkle, and determine who you think wants to preserve tradition more and who is more open to change, and how we see this, right? So do you think that Twinkle is more open to change, or is it Sanjeev as he comes in and he says, we need to put away these kind of old ways of doing things. We need to adapt this kind of new culture. And then Twinkle kind of has her own mindset of how she needs to adapt this new culture. And so you think about them, who do you think is more open to change? And so those are the kind of the thoughts that we would have, the discussions that we'd have in class, and some things that I want you to take from that. I wanted to read through a couple of poems with you that I also had you read. This one is Sometime During Eternity, and there seems to be a sense of loss within this. And I want you to think about, what is the sense of loss, or who do you think this poem is directed towards? Is it directed more towards believers of Christianity, or is it directed more towards non-believers of Christianity? And so this is mainly about Christ, and it's meant to be said in kind of a beatnik, slam poetry kind of way, and I'm probably not very good for a voiceover for that, but I'll kind of muddle through and do my best. But I want you thinking about those thoughts. Who's the poem directed towards? How do we see a sense of loss? Sometime during eternity, some guy shows up, and one of them who shows up real late is a kind of a carpenter from some square-type place like Galilee, and he starts wailing and claiming that he's hip to who made heaven and earth, and that the cat who really laid it on us is his dad. And moreover, he adds, it's all writ down in some scroll-type parchments, which some henchmen leave laying around the Dead Sea somewheres a long time ago, and which you won't even find for a couple thousand years or so, or at least for 1947 of them, to be exact. And even then, nobody really believes them, or me for that matter. You're hot. They lay him and they cool him, and they stretch him on a tree to cool, and everybody after that is always making models of this tree, with him hung up, and always crooning his name and calling him to come down and sit in on their combo, as if he's the kind of king cat who's got to blow, or if they can't quite make it. Only he don't come down from his tree. He just hang there on his tree, looking real petered out and real cool. And also, according to the roundup of the late world news from the usual unreliable sources, real dead. So as you think about this, do you think that this is intended for kind of Christians who say they believe, but they don't really believe, right? That they kind of have this idea, as it says in the scriptures, that they draw near to them, near to Christ with their mouths, but their hearts are far away? Or do you think this is more kind of geared towards non-believers and how they view Christians, right? And that's kind of an interesting tension that we see within the poem. And who do you think this is, directed towards? And the poem reads as a lament or a loss. And so, what is being lost? Is it the loss of religion that's being lost, or is it the loss of, freedom of thought that's being lost? And so, something to think about as you move forward with, and to consider within this particular poem, and then think about how this fits in with this overall discussion that we've been having about the loss of religion. How does this fit in with that discussion? Does this suggest that maybe Christianity is somehow less relevant to people today? Is that what it's suggesting? Or is it suggesting that people today are missing something? They're missing the point of Christianity as they look for other things, as they look for other artifacts to fill them. So that's something else to consider that I would like to discuss if we were meeting face to face. I want to take a look at a couple of poems done by members of the church and how they're taking a look at religion and this complexity. This one, the interview, deals with missionaries who are interviewing someone for baptism, and some of the awkwardness that happens. And a lot of what we see here is the failure to communicate and the ability, the loss within language, and how sometimes religious ideas can be lost within that, and some of the awkward tensions that can be teased out within a baptismal interview, right? A problem muy adentro, she tells him, deep inside her, a metal loop like a piece of Satan, but the doctor who was supposed to remove it on vacation, all the while her hands churning at her belt line like paddle wheels. To this add crying, and now her question, can God make her clean with this coiled thing inside her? So I'll kind of leave it to your imagination what's going on inside her as she has this awkwardness as they're talking about the things that you would talk about in a baptismal interview, and she kind of feels like she's on the hot seat here. This baptismal interview, this gringo's missionary's first confession from a girl his age. Between them, a scratch on her mother's kitchen table, a paring knife, and a sliced pomegranate. Is it to him or the room some sort of pulsing? He does not want to picture the loop or watch the hands churning. He wants to build a church for her out of words, invite her to pass inside. Instead, wounds splay the walls. Her closed-eye lover squirming the table. He keeps his eyes moving. When he speaks, his voice, but inside him a burning like a flock of birds. Renewal, font, Jesus. Words that hover then pass between them. They seem inside out and too small. He opens his book to a clean page, writes her name and birth date, then her city, which he keeps spelling wrong. La cisterna, she says, cistern, like this, a vessel, a place of water. She makes a pitcher out of the air, and for an instant the room gathers at her fingers. She holds before him what nestles inside her. He has crossed some barrier, he knows. This boy who in 19 years has been with no one but himself, he is saying what sounds like God's name, asking for something. Darkness, maybe, or blood. He knows it has to do with thirst. And so you have this awkward scenario here of talking about the law of chastity and some of that, the awkwardness that happens within that. And then in addition to that, you have the failure of communication and how that adds to this greater complexity of religion going off into this kind of global world. I want to take a look at another of his poems. A missionary considers his converts. And what we see within this poem are two missionaries responding differently to religious artifacts. And a similar way that we see with Sanjeev and Twinkle in the Blessed House, we see kind of that awkwardness being teased out with missionaries as they go and collect these artifacts from Catholics going down to, South America and then collecting them. And the question is, what do we do with them, right? And there's different responses from these two missionaries. For weeks, he did nothing but walk dirt roads and shake hands saying hello. We carried bricks for old women, hoed gardens, put on puppet shows, and 5 peso coins sprout like corn from their children's ears. Finally, they began opening their doors. The first was a half-blind cobbler who gave us yerba mate in heavy mugs, called us sons. We taught campesinos, storekeepers, the mayor, his 3 cloistered sisters, even his mother who owns the bar and half the town. And we baptized 23. We asked them to believe in God, no images. Then we asked for their statues, their false books. Today, after just 3 visits, we walked away heavy as pack horses, unloading everything in our backyard along the fence. Saints and angels, wooden Madonnas, a crucifix worn brown by kisses. Looking out at the clutter, Elder Hansen started to laugh. 3 months out, but already in his work, teachable, never imagining a world without God. Why not burn it, he said. And I nodded, imagining statues melting in smoke. The whole superstitious mess dumped into a shallow grave beneath our window. But tonight, awake suddenly, my belief, a borrowed shirt, too long in the sleeves, that means that he's getting older and too old to borrow his testimony. I feel like saving them. Above me, cold stars, while here, along the fence, washed in moonlight, smile gods I can hold in my hands. And so it's an interesting, tension between the narrator and Elder Hansen and how they respond to these religious artifacts, right? So what do you think that it is that the narrator longs for? Do you think that Elder Hansen or the narrator has a better response to these objects? And what do you think that Twinkle and the narrator of this poem have such emotional connection to religious objects that they're not believers in them, right? And so what is it about these religious artifacts that become important, right? What does he see value in as he sees the crucifix that's worn brown by kisses? What does that mean, right? What does that devotion mean? And is that completely invaluable, right? Even though we don't put a lot of, as members of the church, we don't put, stock in saints and Madonna and crucifix, people have that kind of belief and devotion in them, that becomes an outward manifestation of their inward belief. And I think the narrator comes to better understand that, even though there needs to be a corrected kind of understanding of where we should put our faith rather than in objects, right? We need to put it in God. But there is something to that this is kind of their devotion, their way of seeing, right? Their connection with God, that sense of closeness. And maybe that's what the narrator sees within that. I wanted to leave you for this lecture with Darlene Young. She's another member of the church. And she talks about the angels of mercy, referring to the ward leadership, more specifically to the Relief Society. And when you think about it, there's another interesting kind of awkward moment within this, and the question then is what do we do with that, right? The Seventh Ward Relief Society presidency argued long and soft whether Jeannie Goodmanson deserved to have the sisters bring her family meals. It seemed the precedent was vague. No one was sure if boob job qualified as a legitimate call for aid. Janie herself had never asked for help, a fault they found it harder to forgive than even the vanity behind the worldliness of D-cup ambition. But in the end, charity did not fail. The sisters marched on in grim duty, each evening clutching covered casseroles, for after all, it wasn't the children's fault. More than once, though, by some oversight, the dessert came out a little short. As if by some consensus, they all knew that Janie's husband, Jim, could do without a piece of pie that night. So as we think about this, right, do you think that Janie should be given these dinners? And what's interesting about that is she never asked. And because she never asked, they become even more annoyed with her, right? And some, students take a look at this poem and they're offended by the content of it, but we don't necessarily know what the surgery was for, right? It could be that she had cancer. It could be that she had some type of, other problem that's behind it that we don't know about. And the idea is that neither do the sisters in the Relief Society. They feel that she's being vain and they judge her for it. And so as we think about that, we have to think about how does the poem highlight the problems of vanity? As these sisters judge both Janie and her husband Jim, they start to think about how they, are better than them. And because they're better than them, they decide that it's better that charity doesn't faileth, that they deliver it, because after all, it's not the children's fault. And so they feel that they are superior to Janie and the husband, and therefore they're going to show them their superiority, their level of forgiveness over the situation that they don't really understand or fully comprehend, or even try to fully comprehend, that they just butt in without any type of asking, right? And then the other kind of vanity and irony that we see with the poem is the reader. The reader judges the Seventh Ward Relief Society, judging Janie. And so what's great about this particular poem is it exposes how quick we are as human beings to judge others without knowing the full complexities to what people are going through. And so as we think about that, and as we kind of close this discussion for the day, as we go back to thinking about that connectivity and then that loss of connectivity that we feel in the world today, is there a way that we can overcome that, right? Without feeling superior, with feeling greater connectivity, greater unity, a greater sense of community, as we kind of go beyond our differences, if we stop judging people and thinking that we're better than others, is there a way that we can find more equality within that, right? And so as we take a look, then the next section is going to take a look a little bit more specifically at religious extremism and the problems that lead to war and greater conflict, as we take a look at the politics and how religion and wars are going to become more interrelated and what to do with that. This lecture is getting you to think more about that idea of connectivity and that sense of loss that we feel, particularly in the world today. But also, we've felt this for the last 30 plus years. And so just some food for thought.